This session is on best laid campaign plans and how to change them. So we're going to dig in. As I mentioned, this is our very first Arena Academy 201 session for this summer. We are putting on a series of trainings over the course of the summer with the purpose of helping to support folks who are on campaigns and working in organizations that are adjacent to campaigns. And of course, for those folks who are currently looking for jobs on campaigns and in this process of figuring out what is next and how to do that. And so we wanted to provide an area where we can be creative, collaborative, and learn together, because so much of politics is based upon a mentorship model where if you know the right person or have the right support, you can figure it out. And a lot of it's based upon figuring it out yourself. And so we want to create a learning community where we can all come together to learn, to teach, to hear from each other, and to share best practices. Because especially in this world where we are isolated, where we are spending a lot of our campaign time alone and on our own, we want you all to know that there's someone in Texas who's going through the same thing that you are in Michigan, who's going through the same thing that you are in California, who's going through the same thing that you are in Florida. And so we are here to bring together this incredible community of you, political professionals, people involved in this important work in 2020. So thank you for being here. A little bit about why are we here today? So today I want to actually just center us all, take a minute, and I want us to take a deep breath and think a little bit about why you personally, why are you here today? What do you want to get out of this training? So today, what we want to think about as a whole, we want you all to be thoughtful, creative strategists who are leading people-centered campaigns and organizations. And so that's why today we want to go through a framework for problem solving and introduce you to a creative approach for confronting some of the challenges that you all will be confronting this year on the campaign trail. So problem solving is always a part of campaigns, right? You're always doing something, but this year in particular, we're facing a particularly unique set of problems. So I'm going to pass this over to Abby to talk a little bit about what this training's about.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. It's wonderful to be here with you guys this morning. I am coming to you from Chicago, where it is 100 degrees outside and it is not a dry heat. So for once, I am super excited to be in front of a computer in air conditioning on a Saturday morning, and excited to spend the next few hours with you guys. So what this training is, you know, when we thought about running a training in the summer of an election year, we wanted to be really specific and intentional about how we're using time, both our time and your time. And so with that in mind, this training was created to give very practical skills and actually some practical space to work on a real problem. So we're going to do 3 things today. We're going to provide an introduction to a problem-solving framework that you can apply to challenges that you're encountering during your campaign. We're going to do an overview of methods to align and collaborate with your team on problem solving. And then we are, as I mentioned, giving you an opportunity to workshop a challenge you're currently facing. I want to also talk about what this training is not, just so we're on the same page about what we should all be expecting out of the next 2.5 hours. This is not a how-to for writing a campaign plan. If you need to do that, if you're curious about learning more about that, we have a wonderful tool on arena.run/toolbox that walks you through what a campaign plan should look like and how to do it. This is not a substitute for finding your own solutions to your own challenges. And finally, though I know this is on everyone's brain at the moment, this is not actually a one-size-fits-all prescription for adapting your campaign because of COVID. The reason it's not, though we will talk about COVID and we will talk about lots of other challenges, is that every campaign is different. And so we really want to use this training to give you a tool, both for the immediate, what do I do because we can't knock on doors, but also a tool that you can use for future challenges, hopefully not global pandemic size. Okay, So now that we know what we're here to do, I want to talk about who's in the room today. I'm going to go first. So I am Abby Witt. My pronouns are she, her, hers. As I mentioned, I am a proud Chicagoan. I started as an organizer in 2004, and since then have worked on 6 cycles, both at the local, congressional, statewide, and federal levels. In between, I have worked on advocacy campaigns, both individual campaigns and also running advocacy organizations. And I have also spent time in government, both in Chicago and at the White House during the Obama years. And I will tell you that I'm excited to be here with you all this morning to talk about adapting programs, because in every single one of those instances, regardless of whether I was an organizer or a political director or in charge, something went wrong. Something always goes wrong. And so today we're going to talk about what happens when that happens, and how to come out of it stronger and better and heading towards victory. So that's me. Julia, will you do the honors?
Awesome. Hi, all. I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm Julia Leitner. I'm the training director with ARENA. I use she, her pronouns. I have been organizing and training for over a decade. Actually got my start in 2008 in New Mexico on Tom Udall's Senate campaign. And from there, went actually into labor organizing and worked with childcare providers to help them form their first union in California, in Oakland, and worked with SEIU. I also worked on the Fight for 15 with fast food workers. And I have worked to help unionize academic workers at the UC system through the UAW. I worked on the 2016 campaign, and most recently, for those of you out there, I know I have a few fellow Warrenites. I was the training director in California for the Warren campaign, and came back from that and back to ARENA. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. But this tells one picture of the story. I also just wanted to share, as you can see here, I am a huge coffee fanatic. My word to describe myself for today was caffeinated. So always the case, pretty much. And so love coffee, love arepas. I used to live in Colombia, and I worked with coffee farmers in Colombia. And so some of what we're going to talk about today is a framework that I used when working in Colombia and working with some of these coffee farmers. I also come from a labor background, and so part of my background is sort of constantly being interested in how do we take some of the movement building of labor organizing and mix it with some of the sprint and fast pace of electoral organizing. And so much of what I'm passionate about and interested about is how do we take from different fields and learn from different fields in order to make our campaigns stronger, more inclusive, and more creative. And so that's what I'm so excited to be here with you today to talk about, is how do we take some of these learnings from other places, from other fields, and apply them to what we're doing on campaigns. So we're gonna do a very fun exercise to get us started. A lot of this training today, I want us to take the opportunity to kind of break out of whatever your to-do list is, whatever your get it done mindset is, and give yourself the grace and the space to be creative. So we're gonna do an introductory exercise. There is no right way to do this. There's no correct answer. We're going to pair you off in breakout rooms. If you haven't ever done breakout rooms on Zoom before, you'll see a pop-up come up on your screen in a few minutes that says, take me to a breakout room. You're gonna say yes, and you're gonna be paired up with another person in the room. What you are gonna do is, with your pen and paper that you should have handy, you're gonna sketch a portrait of your partner. I am not a fine artist. I don't know if anyone else out there is a fine artist. Amazing to you. But if you're not, this is just the opportunity to get into a creative space, right? So you're gonna sketch a portrait of your partner while you talk to them and introduce yourself. So the things that you wanna introduce yourself, Tell them your name, your pronouns, your hometown, and a little bit about why you're interested in this training. So we're gonna have 5 minutes to do this. I am so excited. Are you all ready? Anyone have questions about this exercise and what to do? All right. We want to first set the space a little bit of this online space that we've created, and therefore just want to acknowledge some simple truths about what it means to be here together on a Zoom call and a training. The first, honestly, as a training director, as many of us know, learning online is challenging. It is very hard, but it is also possible. And so we are going to lean into that and do that today. The other fact that we have as far as setting the space for today is that we need to create community. We learn best when we are able to be vulnerable, when we are able to feel creative and be creative. What you all just did is this exercise of opening yourself up to showing your artwork, whatever that might have looked like, is a space of vulnerability. So we want to create a sense of community, which takes work and it takes vulnerability. Finally, taking this time to deepen your learning is important. Again, we are so often on campaigns learning on the fly, learning on the go. And so I want to give you all permission to take this time for yourself to learn and really lean into that experience. You deserve this moment to learn and to strengthen your own skills. And then finally, just a note that this is our time together. So let's demand that it be great. Let's have high expectations of each other and of ourselves. And so with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Abby to go over some group norms.
Yeah. So when we talk about building community quickly, one of the ways that we do that is by being vulnerable enough to randomly draw a person that you have never met before in your life. Kudos on acing that challenge. But another is to set some norms. So we have some basic understanding of how we'll interact with each other and approach one another during this session. So Julia, if you'll go to the next slide. The first is an oldie but goodie. For those of you who were around in 2012, you'll remember this from Obama World, which was respect, empower, include. Very straightforward, very simple, but we ask that you come to this space respectfully with an intent to empower people around you and with an inclusive attitude. The next is to be present. We know that many of you are on campaigns, are running campaigns. There is a constant source of just activity happening in the world. As Julia said, you owe it to yourself. We want to give you permission to put the smartphone down and pay attention. Make space and take space. So there are a bunch of different ways you can phrase this. The thing that we want you to take away from however you define make space and take space is to be mindful of how you participate. If you are someone who always has their hand raised, who always is answering a question, make sure that you're allowing space for those who are not as comfortable to do the same, and vice versa. And then be curious. This is my favorite. I feel like there is so much to learn about the world of campaigns, and we want you to ask why. We want you to make sure that you walk away from today with a deep understanding of what we're talking about and how to actually use the tools we're providing. So be curious, ask why, we're here for it. We want you to call in and not out. So assume best intentions. Remember, we are coming in with a respectful attitude. So assume best intentions and be mindful of your impact. And then what else? These are sort of our go-to norms when creating a safe space. And we feel like they give good guardrails for how people should interact with each other and assume about each other. But what have we missed? What should we add? You can either drop it into the chat, you can shout it out, you can raise your hand. Okay, so we've introduced ourselves, we know who's here, we know how we're gonna interact with each other. Let's dive into how we're gonna get through today. So the first thing we're gonna do is actually define this sort of wonky phrase, human-centered design. The next is we're going to walk you through how to actually frame your challenge so that you are going into any changes to your program or adaptation with an open mind that allows for all possible solutions. We're also going to walk through the 3 phases of human-centered design. So inspiration, ideation, and implementation. During each of those steps, we're going to use an example that we have come up with that is sort of common among political campaigns. We're also going to give you time to work on the problem that you brought with you today. And then finally, we will debrief and close. Okay, we're going to dive right on in. So as we mentioned, Heather and Alexis are here to help you with any technical challenges. The chat is always open for questions. We are going to save sort of the majority of questions to the end, but if you have an urgent clarification, please put some asterisks, excuse me, next to your entry in the chat, and we will make sure that we get to it right away. Okay, so what is human-centered design? It sounds kind of good. We like humans. It sounds kind of wonky. Do we really have time for something like this on campaigns? So let's just get into what it is. Human-centered design puts people at the core of problem solving and solutions. That is it. That's the framework. We're going to learn all of these tools to help you put people first. It's a good deal. Okay, so what does that mean for campaigns, and how do we take this rather academic sounding theory or framework and translate it to the work that we do? Human-centered design has actually been used for a long time in the development space as well as the private sector. So to give you some examples, instead of designing a product and then looking for customers or consumers, you design a product by testing it and designing it constantly with the end user in mind. In the end, that means that you have a result that people like, want, and need. So we're going to talk about how you do that designing and testing for voters, for volunteers, and for staff on campaigns. It also means that no matter what problem your campaign faces, ultimately it's about people, right? We need those voters, we need that staff, and we need those volunteers. So we want the solutions that you're thinking of to be designed with all of those people in mind. Julia actually built this slide deck and chose this GIF, and she didn't know it when she chose this GIF at the time, but this is actually highly relevant to my personal story. And so I'm going to talk about the example we're going to use throughout this training in a second. But when I was the managing director of Organizing for Action, it was 2013, and as you might remember, we had a budget shutdown. So the federal government just fully shut down for 3 weeks. In the lead up to it, it was my job to figure out what on earth was going on and how, as Organizing for Action, we could best engage grassroots support to prevent a shutdown, and then once the shutdown happened, to turn the government back on. So I had to advise my staff and plan for what on earth we were going to do in this sort of larger than life context. And one of the things that happened was, I would talk to people at the White House, I would find out what they were thinking, I would talk to people on Capitol Hill, both on the Senate side and the House side, and I would hear what they were thinking. And they were just thinking of like 3 totally different scenarios, right? Nothing they said matched up. And I was sitting there trying to translate, okay, well, we have all this different information coming in. I have to figure out what we're going to do with, thousands of volunteers across the country who are angry, they have passion. We can use it to leverage against legislators and get them to do the right thing. But we're getting all this different intelligence and we don't really know what to do with it. And my boss at the time said, look, it's just clear there is no plan. There just is no plan. And I thought, well, they're the White House. They have to have a plan. It's Congress. They have to have a plan. And the truth is, a government shutdown is sort of, on the scale of things that can go wrong, pretty bad, right? You need the federal government to be working. But it was true, they didn't have a plan, right? People thought they had good ideas. They didn't necessarily have a way to solve this problem. And so the advice to me was stop waiting for someone else to come up with a plan, figure out what you want to do with the political power that we have, and let's use it. And I say that not only because there's this GIF on the screen, but honestly, because I think that is maybe the best professional advice I have ever had or have ever received. And I think it's especially important when considering how to adapt your campaign plans. In a COVID environment, in a regular environment, something will always happen. I think it is very natural to sort of look to trusted voices around you for solutions. And I would just impart upon you that this training and the tools that we're going to provide you today give you the power to make a decision that you think is best to leverage the resources you have to make a change and keep going in the right direction, whether that is winning an election, whether that is changing a law. All of that is within your control, and you should do good things with it. So all of that said, we are going to use a very traditional example to talk through today. This may be a problem that many of you are struggling with in reality on your own races. You may have brought a problem with you today that has nothing to do with it. But the problem that we're going to walk through, because we think it's basic enough and applicable enough that it will make sense, is imagine that we are on a campaign that has not raised enough money to execute on its original plan, right? Campaigns fall short of fundraising goals all the time, pretty universal. So what does that mean? That means that the organizing director is now only going to be able to hire 2 organizers instead of the 5 organizers that they had planned for. Our question, how should they adjust their organizing plan? So I know even reading that, my blood pressure is rising, and I'm not in actively that situation right now. So I want to start by taking a step back. So Julia, if you would click to the next slide. Human-centered design is about many things, one of which is actually giving yourself to take a step back and get creative. So think about, the last time you were rushing to meet a deadline, and think about how it felt like the night before you had to get it done. Then think about maybe what it felt like 2 weeks before the deadline, right? You were more open possibly to creative ideas on how to solve the problem. And rather than feeling constrained by it, you actually potentially could see it as an opportunity to bring creativity to solve maybe more than one problem at the time. So I want to start with human-centered design mindsets, and these are just a sampling of them, really to sort of explain, part of this framework is giving yourself time to do it, even if it's a shorter, an academic or a corporate operation using human-centered design might take more time than you will ever have on a campaign. But even if it's just 72 hours, remember that this framework requires sort of some more positive mindsets than you might originally think of when confronted with a challenge. So things like creative confidence, empathy, learning from failure, always be iterating, and optimism are not necessarily mindsets that you might approach a challenge with, particularly if it's something like, I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get to execute on this really difficult mission. But they're important to remember as we go through this. Okay, but a mindset alone isn't going to solve a problem. So let's get down to business. How are we actually going to do this? It works through 3 steps. The first is inspiration. This is where you really explore the full scope of your challenge. So it can be super stressful to do this. I know when something goes wrong, there's a tendency to sort of say, okay, I know what it is, and I don't really want to open my eyes fully and look around at the damage. But this is where you really shine a light on the challenge to make sure you understand the whole thing. So you understand exactly the problem that you're solving for. The second phase is ideation. And that's really where you brainstorm, you test, and then rinse and repeat until you've got your solution. And the third and final phase is implementation, where, as you might expect, you actually implement your solution as well as whatever accountability measures you've got in place to make sure that it's working. So these are sort of fancy named phases. I know if you're, trying to solve a problem on a campaign, you may not, lean towards sort of identifying 3 phases and walking through all of that. And we would actually encourage you to start thinking this way, whether these take, each take a week, whether they each take a day, really giving yourself the time to understand the problem, to be creative and not sort of shut down atypical solutions, and to implement it with fidelity are all incredibly important to successfully adapting a plan. Julia, I will kick it back to you to start us on inspiration.
Amazing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about framing your challenge. So how do we actually frame this problem and start to think about it? And also, I'm going to make a note to myself. I keep saying problem. I'm going to try to frame it as like a challenge or an opportunity. Encourage everyone to follow along with me in that reframing. So what problem are you all trying to solve? So if we go back to our original challenge, right, your campaign hasn't raised enough money. You can only hire 2 out of the original 5 organizers who you originally thought. So one way I might frame this challenge is our organizing team has to operate at a lower staff capacity, but we still have ambitious organizing goals. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we have a lower capacity. So this might be a different way of framing this challenge. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn that framing into a question. So let's take a look at how that might look. Again, looking at our original problem, how might our organizers meet their goals and feel supported in this new context? This is sort of one of the questions that I want to solve for, right? I want to solve for my organizers feeling supported, feeling confident, but still not, giving away some of the goals that we have as far as our campaign and what needs to be done. So how might our organizers meet their goals and feel supported in this new context? A great way to start with a challenge or with a framing your challenge question is through this how might framing, right? How might we do this? Rather than saying we should or how should we fix it, think about how might we. It opens up a little bit as far as creativity. So let's go into some thoughts about how we frame this question. So your question should allow for a variety of solutions. The question, how do I get my campaign manager to allocate more money to the organizing program, doesn't necessarily have that many solutions to it unless your campaign manager is a pushover and you think this is really possible. So think about a way to frame your question so that it has a variety of solutions. Don't make it too broad. What does that mean? How might organizing look and change in 2020? That is a very big question that I don't think I have the power to answer. I don't think any individual, and we as teams and as campaigns will start to answer this question, but it's a very broad question. So how might organizing change in 2020? Not the best way to frame that question. It's very broad. The other pitfall that you want to watch out for is not to make your question too narrow. So the question, how can our new relational organizing app help our organizers meet their goals? That's a very narrow question. Why? Because it already assumes you've adopted this organizing app, and this organizing app is the best solution to your problem. And you're sort of forcing a solution of the app is now the solution, and so how do I get other people to use it? Rather than thinking a little bit more expansively of, what are different ways that we could implement relational organizing. So these are just things to keep in mind as you are framing your questions. It should have a variety of solutions. It shouldn't be too broad, and it shouldn't be too narrow. So we're gonna take 7 minutes, and there's a worksheet that we're gonna drop into the chat. And you all are gonna take some time to walk through these steps on your own with whatever challenge or opportunity you brought to the table today. So if you don't have one, feel free to use the challenge that we framed there, where we don't have the same staff capacity as we thought we would. And Alexis just dropped the worksheet into the chat. So if you go ahead and click into that, make a copy of the worksheet, and you can start to fill it out yourself and go through these steps. And at the end, we'll share out some of our questions. So our next phase, our first phase, now that we have our questions, our challenge questions, we're gonna think about inspiration. Where do we go for inspiration to find the solutions to these challenges? So inspiration phase, it's really about learning. It's about taking a step back from thinking that we have the answer, or if we just try hard enough, we'll come up with it ourselves. It's taking a step back, putting ourselves into the place of a learner, thinking through creative possibilities, and engaging with people who are involved in this challenge. So a few questions that we're going to answer during this specific phase of human-centered design process. How do we get started? Right? How do we get started tackling this? Because I don't know about you all, but oftentimes we have challenges that are sort of like, I'm just going to ignore that. It's like the side vision thing, where I don't want to look directly at it, because if I look directly at it, I'm going to have to confront it. If I just keep it over here in my side vision, then at least I know it's still there, but I haven't come up with any solutions to it. So we're going to think about, how do we get started, actually sit down to start that process. We're going to think about who needs to be involved in the problem solving process. So who do we need to bring in to be with us? We're going to think through what are the tools at your disposal in order to solve this challenge, and thinking about what is additional information that you need. Where can you go for research and finding some answers? So we have 3 steps of inspiration. The first step is going to be building your team. So again, thinking about we're facing this challenge head on, who needs to be on your team? If you have a deputy, or if you have, your candidate, maybe your candidate needs to be a part of this problem solving process. So thinking about, is there anyone that needs to be on your team? I wanna see any hands for those out there who are a team of 1. Teams of 1 do we have? All right. You all, we're with you too, right? You can be a team of 1, and we're going to encourage you to go out to find the resources, but that's okay too. You can be your own team. I want to deputize you right now to be fully empowered to embrace and find solutions to this problem. So the next thing you want to do, and we did a little bit of this in the worksheet, but you want to define your audience. So think about fully, who are all of the people who this challenge touches? Who are all of the people involved in this particular challenge? To take Tanya's example, right? We have your candidate, we have your volunteers, we have your 30,000 person voter universe, and we have your kids, and we have any partners who are helping you with those kids and that child rearing. So those are all of the people who are part of your audience. So you want to think about all of the different folks who are involved in this process. And then we're going to dive in to some research and some interviews. Again, want to put on our lab coats and our thinking hats and allow ourselves to take a position of curiosity towards this challenge. All right, so thinking about research and interviews. Let's first dive into research. This is something that you can do by yourself. So all my teams of 1, high five. This is something you got. So here are a couple of different ways to frame this research to think about creative possibilities. So the first thing is analogous inspiration. in all honesty, what we are doing here today with applying human-centered design to politics is analogous inspiration. It means we're taking something from one area and applying it to a different area. So I want you to think about what are other industries, nonprofits, campaigns, places outside of your traditional scope that are doing something similar or that you might be taking inspiration from. The second one is, again, allowing ourselves the creativity and the space to sketch, to draw something out. I have a mentor whose name is Julio. He was part of the United Farm Workers movement in California, and he was a student organizer at UC Santa Barbara when Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were working with farm workers and organizing boycotts. And so he was in charge of the UC Santa Barbara campus. And he is a mentor and would mentor me when I was a union organizer on what to do, how to organize. And I remember coming to him once with talking about my organizing committee. And I had all of these people who are on my organizing committee, and I was having a hard time getting them all sort of pointed in the right direction and productive towards meeting our goal of getting people joining the union. And so he just said, Julia, draw it out. I want you to take and do stick figures, whatever it might be, draw out your organizing committee and describe them. And it was the most helpful thing to go from a list of names on a spreadsheet to a physical picture of what everyone looked like and how they fit into the plan that I was going through. And so having a different way of expressing it really opened up my mind and my ability towards this particular challenge that I was facing. So I want to encourage you all to draw it out, right? To sketch it. What is your problem? Who are all the different actors involved in this? The third thing is secondary research. So do you need to go and find information about something specific from somewhere else? For example, do you need to find out more about voting laws within your state? Do you need to find out more about campaign finance laws? Not sure what it is, but are there things that you have the power to research yourself that you need to take a look at? And then the fourth one is thinking about extremes and mainstreams. So again, this is just defining your audience and defining your solution. Thinking about mainstreams might be thinking about folks who are, volunteering on your campaign, and sort of your typical volunteer. Who is their typical volunteer? And then you want to think about people who are on either side of that. So what are atypical volunteers? Who are other volunteers who fall within different categories? If most of your volunteers, have 10 hours a week to give, what about the volunteer who only has an hour to give a week? What about the volunteer who would really like to be employed by your campaign and has a lot of time to give? So what are the different, both the mainstream, how do you define that about your particular problem, and then what are the extremes? Finally, we have interviews. So with the interview process, this is where you're going to bring other people in. Who should you interview? You can interview your staff, your voters. Your voters can be your mother if she's a voter within your district, right? You can interview volunteers on your campaign, experts, advisors, people who are in similar situations. So hi team, we're now all connected on this incredible platform called Arena Careers, and you all have the ability to reach out to each other after this training to talk through some of these challenges. So thinking about people who are in similar situations. Genevieve and Leah, I see you. All right. And then what should you be asking during these interviews? You want to start with broad questions. So thinking, again, this time kind of zooming out on the problem. Start broad. You want to ask questions to help define someone else's context or situation. So if you're interviewing a peer who's in a similar situation, you want to ask them questions about how maybe their situation is different than yours. You want to then get specific. So start to specifically channel towards your specific challenge. And then you also want to ask some questions that help you understand someone's internal motives. Why did you make that decision? Why do you think that that is the right way to redefine a voter universe? So start broad, understand the context within which people are operating, and then get specific and ask questions like why. A note here, you want to frame these, especially if you get in touch with experts or advisors. You don't want to, this isn't an opportunity to ask for advice, right? What would you do in this situation? You want to come prepared to these interviews with your specific set of questions. Even if it feels like your challenge is undefinable and it's hard to pin down, you want to come with your own questions and be open to whatever the person has to say. So put yourself in the role of a journalist, someone who is curious, who is getting information that is useful. All right, some best practices. Your inspiration phase should take between 24 to 72 hours. Carve out some time and give yourself some space for this process. Try to talk to at least 3 to 4 people about this. So interviews, try to talk to 3 to 4 people. These interviews can be 30 minutes. You don't have to take 2 hours out of your day to talk through this. You also want to go broad. Don't limit yourself to people who are easily reachable, to people who are within your orbit already. Think a little bit bigger. And then also give yourself a timeline to complete this, because again, we want to think about this holistically as a process with a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's why we have these 3 phases: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. You want to give yourself a timeline for when this is going to happen. So for this particular phase, you want to go for 72 to 24 hours. All right, this GIF was a shot in the dark. Any GBB fans out there? All right, thank you, Tanya. I appreciate you. Wonderful. So some pitfalls to this particular phase is saying things like, this person who I want to interview doesn't have time and I don't want to bother them with these questions. Again, let's embody that creative confidence that Beyonce has and just lean into this, right? Who else is going to solve this problem for you? It's not important, or I'll figure it out myself. Again, we all benefit from having different perspectives and the input of different people. So you want to think about how you're going to ask for help on this particular challenge. And then saying things like, I don't actually need to talk to a lawyer or an expert or a volunteer or a voter. Don't talk yourself out of it. Just taking a pause to say, but what if I don't have time? Again, time is a very precious resource on campaigns. Find the time, make the time. Don't keep this as the problem that is within your peripheral vision that you are just not addressing. Take the time to address it head on, because you will thank yourself, your future self will thank you for actually looking at the challenge rather than just ignoring it and deciding that it's going to somehow magically disappear. If it is only you, hi, we're here to support you. We're here to be a community. We're here to learn together and practice together. Whatever it is that you need, whether you need to talk to a peer, whether you need to talk to an expert, we're here to help as well. And also, you can do this on your own. You can set out the parameters in order to successfully solve. So we're gonna take some time to do something that is a different type of interview, but you are going to be interviewed by a partner about your challenge. So we're going to break out into pairs again, and partner 1, you're going to share your challenge question and about 30 seconds of context around what that is. And then partner 2, I want you to interview partner 1 about that problem. So again, put yourself in the role of a journalist and start asking them probing questions about their particular challenge. We're going to take 15 minutes to do this exercise. So you each have 7 minutes, and then you'll switch. Moving on, we'll get some more time to brainstorm, but I'm going to pass it back over to Abby to talk us through the next phase of this process.
Here we go, phase 2. It's exciting. All right, so this phase, so the ideation phase, is about generating many ideas, evaluating them, and testing them. I love this phase though. I don't know how many people are like me who just feels better about a challenge after you like have cleared off your workspace or have checked a bunch of things off your to-do list. I love that feeling. It doesn't happen all that often, but I love it when it does. So this phase, good news for those of you who are like me, starts with getting organized. Julie, would you click to the next slide? Thank you. So this really starts with something that we call download your learnings. And what you're trying to do here is not yet evaluate, not yet opine on anything, but just capture what you saw and heard during your interviews and research. So if you have a sort of, Costco sized collection of Post-it notes, you can use those and you can make yourself a beautiful mind wall. If you don't have Post-it notes, you can use scraps of paper, you can organize it on a Google Doc, however you work best. But you want to really distill this down to one observation or one quote from your interviews per Post-it note, per scrap of paper, per bullet on a Google Doc. Once you've done that, you are going to try to capture the theme. So you've got all these Post-it notes, you've got these scraps of paper, you've got a Google Doc. It's inevitable that there will be some things in common. So going back to our example, you might have feedback either through interviews or observations about the role of an organizer and what capacity gaps exist there and what we might need to accommodate for. You might also have gotten feedback about volunteer training. So if if your question was about, using volunteer capacity to fill some of these gaps, what are your volunteers going to need to do that? This should not take a super long time, right? So you want to do this quickly in about 10 minutes. You, again, do not want to be reading each piece of paper and trying to evaluate it in the moment. You just want to say, oh, these are both about the role of an organizer, or these 5 things are about volunteer training, and organize them. And then you actually want to take the themes and to eliminate your own bias against them. Julia, you can go to the next slide. You are going to craft these how might we questions that Julia mentioned at the very beginning. There's no limit to how many of these you can ask, which is good news most of the time. You actually want to write down as many of these as possible. And the reason that we say sort of volume is what we're going for here is because, in fact, more often than not, if you ask more questions, you will lead to more conversations, which lead to more ideas. So you want to take your themes, you want to, without, again, evaluating them, without opining on them, ask questions about how might we do this thing? So how might we support volunteers with additional training? How might we empower our existing organizers to build self-sustainable teams of volunteers? How might we target voter contact in areas where we don't have a lot of volunteers, right? Again, you are not trying to answer these questions right away. You are simply trying to ask them to set yourself up for success when you start solutioning. So we're gonna do another breakout. We encourage you, this one is not a partner exercise. This is just you going back to the problem or the challenge that you walked in the door with this morning. So we encourage you, if you want, stand up, walk around while you think about this. But think back on your challenge question and any insights from your interview. And you're gonna take 5 minutes to write down as many how might we questions as you can about your challenge. So if you need to do some of that preliminary organizing into themes to help you get there, you've got the time to do that. But again, we'll take 5 minutes to write down as many how might we questions as you can. Before we break, does anyone have any questions about the exercise?
Because we are so ready to get into this incredible phase of brainstorming. Abby, what's this about? Why do we have rules?
Why do we have rules? Well, I think we have rules much like we have norms. We have rules for brainstorming to make sure that brainstorming is productive. Erica, I'm laughing about your comment in the chat. Julia daily encourages us to get outside. And so we're lucky to have her on the team and encourage us to keep moving. All right, so we have rules for brainstorming, much like norms that we set at the beginning, which is to make sure that every voice is heard. And so when Julie and I were making this, we sort of joked about how might we create rules for brainstorming. And so we have just a few we're gonna run through and then actually practice this with the challenge that you're all working on. So rules for brainstorming. I have one, which is that we should defer judgment. When we say there are no bad ideas, this is like the actual moment when we really mean it. If you've asked a bunch of how might we questions and you're suddenly responding to every one of them with, oh no, that's dumb, or oh, we can't do that, you're not really in the spirit of brainstorming, nor is it going to be successful for you. So my first rule is deferring judgment. Julia, how might we create rules for brainstorming?
Abby, I love the rule of deferred judgment, and I'm going to add on to that we should encourage wild ideas, that no ideas are too crazy. If we think about the fact of like trying to deliver vote by mail ballots to every single person via drone, I think that's a great idea. Let's encourage some wild ideas. What else do you have, Abby? What else should we do for brainstorming?
See, I love what you did there because it gave me an idea, which is yes and. So we should build on the ideas of others, right? Like there's no idea that's just mine. There's no idea that's just Julia's. Let's take something and build on it.
Yes, and Abby, to your building on the ideas of others, but let's also stay focused on the topic. So trying to stay within our original challenge and our original ideas, we can go have wild ideas and into interesting areas. Let's stay focused.
Okay, I like that. I like where you're going. I think that we should also probably commit to having one conversation at a time. I have certainly been in rooms like this one where everyone is trying to speak at the same time and everyone's trying to share at the same time. And to ensure that you really get to hear everything, I think we should not just stay focused on the topic, but have one conversation at a time. So maybe that means going through one theme of your how might we questions at a time, or organizing it in some other way, but I think that's really important.
I totally agree. I am not ready, although I'm ready to relive the diversity and the hope and expectations of this particular debate stage. I'm not ready to relive the talking over of the debate stage. So the other thing I want to add as our last rule, Abby, is just to go for quantity. Like, let's try to generate as many crazy, cool ideas as we possibly can, 101 ideas maybe, to get these creative juices flowing. What do you think about that, Abby?
I think that was, very cheesy, but wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, so those are the rules that we came up with and that we have used in our own experiences when we're trying to brainstorm with either a large group or honestly our teams of one, just yourself, right? Give yourself permission when you're staring at something to like have a safe space to play around in it and get creative. I know often when you're looking at a blank spreadsheet or a blank, document and you have to fill in, there's this pressure to have a right answer the first time. That's not true. No one's going to see that work. So this is the same approach. Give yourself some safe space to get creative. All right. So now it's your turn. We are going to do breakouts in groups of 3 or 4. You are welcome to stand up and shake it out and walk around while you're having these conversations. But in your group, you're going to choose 2 of the how might we questions that you have individually created. And then for each of those questions, we would love to hear your top 2 to 3 ideas that you have collectively brainstormed. So we're going to give you 15 minutes total, 7 minutes per question. So you'll have plenty of time to do a quantity of wild ideas. And then we'll come back and we'll share out. So you can also use the rules that we just created. You can start by creating your own group rules, however you'd like to handle it. Alexis, Heather, are we ready to go?
Awesome. So we've got all these amazing, wonderful ideas. How do we know what works and how do we know what maybe isn't going to work or we're going to have to change for our specific context? We have these incredible ideas going around, but maybe scuba diving in Arizona isn't going to work so much. So we have to iterate and prototype and kind of put a model out in front of people. So the next phase of this, prototyping, is about bringing ideas to life quickly, sharing them, getting feedback, and evolving those ideas. So this is basically, how do we quickly get our ideas in front of the people who are involved in this challenge in order to get their feedback? So we have a couple of steps for prototyping. The first is storyboarding. Storyboarding, I always think about a storyboard as involves like an animation or a cartoon, right? Like you see all the different phases of the different cartoons and what's happening at different times. So again, putting pen to paper, pencil to paper, and sketching out some of your ideas for what this might look like. Why is that important? Because if it only exists in your brain, you want to be sure to sketch something out so that someone else can give you input. So first step, you can storyboard. The second is rapid prototyping. So again, this shouldn't be something where you take 2 days to build an example of what this is. Maybe you're just doing something as quickly as possible in order to get it in front of other people. So if your problem, maybe you're thinking about a spreadsheet of a way to track your volunteers and a way to track the different turfs that you're canvassing or not canvassing or texting into, how do you do that? So another great example from Stephanie, it's a great training. Maybe you take that and get feedback from your campaign and your team about what that looks like. So rapid prototyping, make something quickly, make something that you can, again, get in front of other people to get their feedback, which leads us to the third step, which is getting feedback. So whenever you make something, you really want to get it in front of other folks. Put it in front of your volunteers, your voters, understand what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so think about how you can get their feedback and hear about their perspective on how this helps solve for your challenge. And then finally, you want to think about integrating and iterating. So what does that mean? It means that as you're learning from the feedback, you're actually taking it and incorporating it into your solution. So not just saying, great, thanks, you're actually thinking about it and incorporating it into the next model or the next iteration of your solution. You can always have your own license as far as deciding to maybe discard someone's feedback or say, I don't know if that's the most relevant, but think about it, take it into consideration, and then constantly be improving, iterating this prototype. I just want to mention quickly, we talked about, human-centered design mindsets. I also just want to take a minute to acknowledge prototyping mindsets. Why? Because some of you might be in a position where you're managing up, right? Where you are bringing a solution to your candidate or to your campaign manager or to your direct manager. And it can feel a little bit scary, honestly, because you're sort of like, I came up with this idea. I don't know if it's great. Here's some sketches that I did of it. Here's a quick spreadsheet. So it can feel vulnerable. So I want to bring us into the mindsets for prototyping, which are mindsets that you can align your entire team around. The first is, again, creative confidence, right? Just thinking back, I think Beyonce for me is just like the epitome of everything, but particularly creative confidence. Empathy, having a just try it mindset. So again, also when you're therefore presenting the solution to people on your team, saying, I don't have the best answer or the best solution, but I have a couple of ideas and I would love your input, right? So the other part is unattachment, feeling not completely married to your solution, the first solution that you come up with, right? We don't want to be tinkering in isolation by ourselves and then come up with this perfect solution that we think is perfect that maybe other people don't. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience with a manager where you think that you have the most beautiful idea and you've come up with the most perfect solution, and then you take it to your manager and they're like, this is not what we were, no. So unattachment, being creative, having an open mind. This doesn't have to be perfect. And again, optimism, we can find an answer. So I'm going to assign you all some homework around prototyping. Love us some homework. So I want you to sketch out 3 possible solutions to your challenge. What does this mean? You know, if you were thinking about what the Zoom rooms look like, if you are thinking about scuba diving, I want you to try to sketch, like actually sketch out 3 different solutions to your challenge. They can be storyboards, they can be a single image. It does not in any way have to be fine art, but just think about sketching it to the best of your ability. So that is your homework. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Abby to talk about our final phase of this cycle, which is implementation.
Okay, so we've inspirated, we've ideated. We're just going to pretend that these are all words that you will use normally. So this is the fun part. This is when it all comes together and you get to actually put a solution into play. Actually, if you'll go to the next slide. Implementation is about setting goals and systems to make sure your solution is adopted, monitored, and successful. Before we get into how we do this part, how many of you have ever either been in charge of or have been a part of a group of people who said, we're going to do this thing, and no one gave any details and then it didn't happen, right? The best example is like, oh yeah, we should get a drink sometime. And then you never get a drink because you don't ever set a date or a time or a place. It gets much more complicated when campaigns adopt new tech. Relational organizing tools are a great example of this. They sort of have the technology, but they haven't made sure that the data systems talk to one another. They haven't talked about how they're going to train their volunteers. And so it just sort of sits out there. So when we say that implementation is about making sure your solution is adopted, monitored, and successful, really pay attention to that monitored part, because that's what's going to do, that's like the magic sauce for this. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is define success. Simple question, sometimes a little complicated to answer, but you have from your challenge all the way through questions about your challenge to ideas. How will you know if your solution is successful? Right? You might be trying one of those wild ideas that you like just think is the ticket, but how will you know if it's working? So step number 1 is to define success. Step number 2 is to align on resources. Sometimes this is a part of that wild idea brainstorming conversation, but really making sure that you understand your budget for implementing this solution. What are all the possible expenses? How much time will staff, how much time will volunteers have to put into implementing the solution? So make sure that you are all aligned on resources, everyone that is involved in implementation, so you understand what your guardrails are. And then the next step is that you will create a roadmap, right? So you have defined what your end goal is and how you will know if you're successful. You understand what your tools are in order to implement this solution. So you're going to create a path for yourself or a roadmap. You are going to include key dates. You are going to include milestones that should tell you whether or not you're still on the road to success. You're going to include assignments. And you're going to do all of this because having a plan, particularly in a campaign, which moves quickly, which has lots of sort of moving pieces, everyone needs to be on the same, singing from the same songbook is sort of the colloquialism. People need to understand what the strategy is, even if it's a small part of a much larger strategy. They need to understand what they're doing, right? So they need to understand the strategy. They need to understand what they're working towards. They need to understand how they fit into it. And you, if you're in charge of implementing this solution, need to be able to communicate all of that quickly. So your roadmap, your plan, whatever you want to call it, that's going to lay out your implementation plan, how you're going to do it. And then this is a great example of a project plan. If you've heard of the term Gantt chart, great way to measure all of this. You want to sort of lay it out on a calendar. And I say that a calendar is such an important part of this to make sure that it's actually feasible, right? So often we'll think about sort of the calendar later, or you'll just sort of say, great, we have 2 weeks to do this, and everyone will sort of wait until the last 48 hours, and then you're out of time for certain pieces of it. So really, like, take a look at the calendar when you're going through this. But the final step is to put it all together, right? So you've got your definition of success. You understand the resources you have to make it there. And you have your plan, you have your timeline, you have your roles identified. You want to share it with people now at the end. The phrase that I learned when I was a baby organizer was plan your work and work your plan. And that is what you're doing here, right? You're putting it all together, you're sharing it with the implementation, with people involved in implementation, and then you're going to work it. And you will have done all the work you need to actually measure whether or not you're succeeding and whether you're solving the problem that you set out to solve. And that is it. We're going to do some review. Don't worry. We're not shutting off right here.
All right, team, we made it. We made it through the 3 different steps in this process. Inspiration, ideation, implementation. You all got to start on some of these challenges and things that you're thinking through. And this is just the beginning, you know? These are the first 2 hours of this process. So congratulations, and welcome to your process on this particular challenge. Would love for everyone to take a couple of minutes and either put it into the chat or write it down for yourself. What are you taking with you today? What are you taking with you today? Let's all just take a minute to think through this. What are you taking with you today? What's standing out to you at the end of the day? Visualizing timelines, also goats. Yep, goats is a great idea.
Overcoming analysis paralysis. Kunora, you have my heart. Absolutely.
Brandon, the importance of creating norms for a process to work well. Brandon, love that. It's so important to align your team on all of these things, and to lean into whatever feelings that might bring up. Remembering to combat the, oh, I shouldn't bother this person, they're too busy, impulse when trying to get input on a challenge. Kat, I think that's so, so important. Imposter syndrome is real no matter what level you reach on any campaign in any moment. And, you know, I hope everyone feels empowered and creative as individuals to begin to push past some of those feelings. Or just be with them. Let's see, designing a system for people means acknowledging them as people, not cogs in a machine. Thank you, Theo. I love that. What else do we have? No one should try to go at it alone. Don't be afraid to recruit team members and ask others for help, advice, feedback. Amazing. And Erin, with that, I'm also going to say again, we now have our Arena Careers 201 group. I'll make sure we send that out again. But you all can see everyone who's been in this training and you can connect to each other directly. I saw a lot of people put their information into the chat. If you didn't get the opportunity to do that, you can connect to each other over the platform and continue some of these conversations. Genevieve, the importance of creativity and fluidity. No idea is a bad idea during brainstorming. Volunteers, just do it and make sure to recognize them as people. Awesome, Mara. Oh my gosh, there are so many good ones in here. All right. So we are going to go over our key takeaways from today, a couple of things in addition to all that you have put into this chat. Again, just remembering we have 3 phases of human-centered design: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. Start by framing Yoru. Yep, it says Yoru. Challenge as a question. So thinking about that. When you are going into this process, generate a lot of ideas. Don't fixate on the one right one. Generate many. Brainstorm using guidelines, those norms that we talked about, and go for quantity and creativity. When you're thinking about prototyping, putting something in front of people so that you can get their feedback and you can change and adapt things quickly. As often as possible, I would say this is a big thing, make it visual. Right? Put something tangible in front of people. Make it visual, even if it's a sketch with stick figures. Make it visual. And then plan out each phase of implementation and align your team. So with that, we have a quick survey for you all as a final step for today's training. It's actually the penultimate step, because we have one final one, which is to take a group photo, because this is our very first Arena Academy 201 training. And I am so excited to capture this moment with you all. So I'm going to put on some fun music. We're going to take 5 minutes to fill out this training. Want to thank you all. I know some people have to jump, but if you can stay on for our photo, and definitely would love your feedback on this training. So